I thought I was just fixing a car. I had no idea what I'd just started. They thought spray paint would scare me off. This is my life's work, and I am not backing down.
She saw him before she understood what she was looking at. A car, dead in the rain, hazards dark. A man beside it, phone pressed to his ear, voice low, eyes on the empty road behind him. Not scared. Watching. She didn't know yet what she was walking into. She popped the hood anyway. Her hands found the wires before her mind caught up, a cut line, spliced wrong, made to fail. Someone wanted this car stopped here. Tonight. In the rain. She had 30 seconds. Maybe less. Headlights turned onto the street behind them. 4 of them. Closing fast. She twisted the last wire into place with her bare fingers and said one word, now. The engine caught. He didn't ask how. He just grabbed her wrist and pulled her into the passenger seat as the first gunshot cracked against the rear windshield. She thought she was just fixing a car. She had no idea what she'd just started. Dorita Abara didn't come to Seoul to be found. She came to disappear into her work. Grease under her nails, rent paid on time, no favors owed to anyone. Back in Lagos, her father lost everything to men who wanted a cut of what wasn't theirs. She swore she'd never let that happen to her again, so she built something small and clean in Seoul, and she kept her head down. That was the plan, anyway, until a stranded BMW on a dead-end road pulled her into a war she didn't know existed. The man beside it looked calm in a way that should have warned her. Calm men don't get ambushed on empty streets for no reason. She didn't know his name yet. She definitely didn't know he ran half the city. She just knew the car needed to start. And it did, 3 seconds before everything else fell apart. The rain never really stopped in Seoul. It just changed its mind about how hard it wanted to fall, and most nights it fell hard enough to drum against the corrugated roof of Dorita's garage like something trying to get in. She didn't mind. The noise kept her company. By 11 that night she still had a delivery van up on the lift, its transmission bleeding fluid onto a drop cloth, and a customer's restored 911 waiting behind it with a temperamental starter she'd promised to finish by morning. Her hands were black to the wrist. Her back ached in the specific way it always did after 14 hours standing on concrete. She wiped sweat off her brow with her forearm, because her hands were too filthy to touch her own face, and kept working. This was the life she'd built for herself, one bolt at a time, and she wasn't going to complain about the price of it. 3 years ago she'd been standing in the wreckage of a different garage, in a different city, watching men in cheap suits load her father's tools into the back of a truck because he owed money to people who didn't accept late payments as an answer. Her father had died with grease permanently stained into the creases of his knuckles and a debt he never should have owed in the first place. Dorita had watched Lagos take everything he built and decided, right there in that gutted shop, that she would rather start over with nothing in a country where she knew no one than stay somewhere familiar and watch it happen to her too. So she came to Seoul with 2 suitcases, a set of her father's old wrenches wrapped in a towel, and just enough English and stubbornness to get a work visa and lease a shopfront in Seoul that nobody else wanted, because the roof leaked and the wiring was original to the building. She fixed the roof herself. She fixed the wiring herself. She fixed everything herself, because asking for help had never once gone well for anyone in her family, and she saw no reason tonight would be the exception. Every one she made after rent got wired home to her mother, who still lived in the house Dorita had grown up in, the one that hadn't been touched by the men who came for her father's shop. Dorita was going to keep it that way. She'd rather work until midnight 7 nights a week than owe a single person a single favor she couldn't repay in cash. By the time she locked up it was well past midnight, and the storm had gotten worse instead of better. She pulled her hood up, climbed into her beat-up work truck, and pointed it toward her apartment on the other side of the river, taking the back route along the industrial embankment because it was faster and there was never any traffic down there at this hour. There was a reason for that. Nobody with any sense drove that stretch of road after dark. It ran along a row of shuttered warehouses and half-finished construction sites, poorly lit, with exactly one working street lamp for every 3 that had burned out and never been replaced. It was the kind of place where things happened that nobody talked about afterward. Which was exactly why, when her headlights swept across a black BMW sedan sitting dead in the middle of the road with its hazards dark, her first instinct was to keep driving. Her second instinct, the one that had kept her father's tools in her hands instead of anyone else's, made her slow down. She idled a few meters back, rain hammering her windshield, and studied it. No hazards. No interior light. No one standing around waving for help, which under normal circumstances would have been a relief, except normal circumstances didn't leave an expensive car sitting untouched on a dead road at this hour with nobody calling for a tow. She almost drove past it. She told herself later that she almost did, that some sensible part of her brain screamed at her to keep her foot on the gas and forget she'd ever seen it. Instead she pulled over, grabbed her toolbox from the truck bed, and stepped out into the rain. The man was already out of the car by the time she reached it, standing in the downpour like the weather owed him an apology it hadn't paid yet. He wore a navy suit that had clearly cost more than her truck, now soaked through and clinging to his shoulders, and he held a phone to his ear, speaking low and fast in Korean she couldn't quite catch over the rain. He didn't look at her right away. He looked past her, down the street, toward the dark mouth of the road behind them, and something about the stillness in his posture made the hair on the back of her neck rise before he'd said a single word to her. When he did turn to look at her, his expression didn't do what most people's did when a stranger walked up out of a storm. He didn't look relieved. He didn't look confused. He just studied her for a beat too long, the way a man studies something he's trying to decide is a coincidence or a problem, and then he lowered the phone and said, in accented but clean English, "You should keep driving." "You're welcome," Dorita said, already crouching by the open hood. "Pop this for me." He didn't move for a second. Then, strangely, he did as she asked, and the calm way he did it. No panic, no fumbling, like he'd already run through every version of this moment in his head and this one didn't especially concern him, struck her as more unsettling than if he'd been screaming for help. She clicked her flashlight between her teeth and got to work. It took her about 90 seconds to understand this was not a normal breakdown. The fuel line had been disconnected clean, not torn or worn. Cut and rerouted like someone had wanted it to look accidental to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. Underneath that, tucked behind the ignition relay, sat a small aftermarket module wired directly into the harness, blinking a slow red pulse that had no business being anywhere near a factory ignition system. Her stomach dropped an inch. She'd seen jury-rigged parts before. She'd never seen one built specifically to kill an engine on command from somewhere else. "Someone did this on purpose," she said, straightening up enough to look at him over the hood. Rain ran down the back of her collar. "This isn't a breakdown. Somebody stopped your car." For the first time, something flickered behind his composure, not fear exactly, more like a man recalculating a number he thought he already knew the answer to. "How long to fix it?" he said. Not a question. A demand dressed as one, delivered so calmly it took her a second to register it as urgent. She was already reaching for her wire strippers. "Depends how much you want to keep standing in the rain," she said, and got to work. She worked fast, hands moving on instinct built over a decade of doing exactly this kind of thing for people who couldn't afford to wait, splicing around the module instead of trying to remove it, buying the engine away to ignore whatever kill signal was waiting to be sent. Sparks bit at her fingers. Rain ran into her eyes. She barely noticed him watching her, tight and silent, his gaze flicking every few seconds toward the empty street behind them like he was counting down something only he could hear. She heard it before she saw it, the low, distant hum of engines, more than one, coming fast from the direction of the main road. "Go faster," he said, voice suddenly sharp enough to cut through the rain. "I am going as fast as..." Headlights swung around the far corner. Not one car. 3, moving in formation, black SUVs with no plates visible from this distance, closing the gap far too quickly for anyone with good intentions. He said something low and hard into his phone that wasn't for her, and for the first time she saw real urgency crack through the calm, his hand sliding toward the inside of his jacket in a motion too practiced to be new to him. Her fingers found the last connection. She twisted it into place and slammed the hood down in the same motion. "Now," she said. "Start it now." He didn't need telling twice. The engine caught on the first try, headlights flaring to life, and before she'd even processed the sound of it turning over, his hand was around her wrist, pulling her toward the passenger side with a grip that left no room for negotiation. "Get in the car." "That's not my..." The first gunshot cracked off the pavement somewhere behind them, close enough that she felt it more than heard it, and every argument she had left evaporated. She threw herself into the passenger seat as he dropped into the driver's side, tires spinning against wet asphalt for one agonizing second before catching and launching them forward into the dark. Glass starred in the back windshield. She ducked instinctively, toolbox clutched against her chest like it could stop a bullet, and looked over to find him driving with both hands locked on the wheel, jaw tight, eyes flicking between the road ahead and the mirror behind them where headlights were closing the distance. "Who are you?" she said, and it came out steadier than she felt. He didn't answer. He took the next corner hard enough that she had to brace against the door, and somewhere in the chaos of rain and engine noise and the second gunshot that never quite reached them, she understood that whatever she'd just walked into, there was no version of tonight where she simply drove home and forgot about it. He drove like the city belonged to him, cutting through side streets and back alleys she didn't recognize despite having lived in Seoul for 3 years, until the gap between them and the SUVs behind finally widened and then disappeared altogether. By the time he pulled into an underground garage beneath a nondescript office building, gated, guarded by 2 men who opened the barrier the second they saw the car and said nothing at all. Her hands hadn't stopped shaking, though she'd have died before admitting it out loud. He parked. He killed the engine. For a moment neither of them said anything, the only sound the rain drumming distantly against the street above them and her own pulse loud in her ears. "I'm sorry," he said finally, and it was the first thing he'd said all night that sounded like an apology instead of an order. "You should not have been there tonight." "I fix cars for a living," she said. "I didn't sign up for anything else." "I know." He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "Which is exactly the problem." He brought her upstairs, into a private floor of the building that felt more like a bunker dressed up as an apartment, reinforced windows, a security system she recognized as far beyond anything a normal residence would need, men posted quietly at the stairwell who nodded to him with a deference that had nothing to do with politeness and everything to do with rank. "You'll stay here tonight," he said. "It isn't safe for you to go home yet. I have a shop to open in the morning." "Someone got a good look at your face tonight," he said. "Possibly more than one someone. Until I know who, and how much they saw, going home is not a decision I'm willing to let you make." Something in the way he said "let you make" set her teeth on edge, but underneath the anger was a colder thought she couldn't shake. He wasn't wrong. She'd seen the module wired into his car. Whoever built it wanted him dead tonight, and whoever wanted him dead now had a very clear picture of the woman who'd stopped that from happening. "Who are you?" she asked again, and this time he answered. "Seo-joon," he said. "I run the Baekho syndicate." She'd heard the name before, the way anyone who'd lived in this city long enough eventually did. In hushed conversations at the market, in headlines that never quite named names, in the careful way certain neighborhoods were spoken of by people who'd never admit to knowing why. She'd always assumed it was the kind of thing that existed at a distance from ordinary lives, a rumor with teeth but no reach. Standing in his kitchen at 1 a.m. with rain still drying in her hair, she understood exactly how wrong that assumption had been. "You're Mafia," she said flatly. "I prefer the word syndicate," he said, without a trace of humor. "But yes. I fixed a mob boss's car." "You saved a mob boss's life," he corrected. "Which is a different problem entirely, for both of us." She set her jaw. I'm not getting involved in whatever this is. I have a business. I have rent due. I have people back home who need what I send them every month, and none of that has room in it for gang politics. I understand, he said, and something about how easily he said it made her angrier than if he'd argued. But understanding your position doesn't change the facts. Kang Min-hyuk runs the Chilsung cartel. It was his men on that road tonight, and by now he'll have already reviewed whatever footage exists of the woman who fixed my car in under 2 minutes and got us both out alive. He does not let loose ends stay loose. Then that's your problem to clean up. It became your problem the moment you knelt down in front of my hood, he said, quiet and certain, and for the first time that night she had nothing to say back to him, because some ugly, small part of her already knew he was right. She left the safe house before sunrise anyway, ignoring his objections, telling herself that whatever danger existed would pass her by if she simply went back to minding her own business the way she always had. She didn't sleep. She sat behind the counter of her garage all morning, jumping at every sound the street made, telling herself it was exhaustion and nothing more. 3 streets away, in a part of the syndicate's operation Dorita would never see, Seo-joon sat across a table from 4 of his most senior men, and asked one question in a voice that made the temperature of the room drop several degrees. Who knew my route last night? Nobody answered right away. He hadn't expected them to. Betrayal rarely announces itself, it waits, quiet and patient, hoping the question passes by without landing anywhere close to it. He had them go through it piece by piece, who scheduled the car, who confirmed the route, who had access to the vehicle in the hours before it left the compound. The list narrowed slowly, painfully, the way these things always did, until it came down to one name neither of the deputies wanted to say out loud. Driver Choi, who had served this family for 6 years, who had driven Seo-joon's mother to temple every week without fail, who had access to that car and that route and no reason anyone had ever questioned. The financial records, once someone finally thought to look, told the rest of it without needing a confession. A payment, routed through 3 shell accounts before it landed somewhere untraceable enough that whoever built it thought it would stay hidden. It hadn't. Not from people whose entire business was finding things others wanted hidden. Kang Min-hyuk's money. Kang Min-hyuk's kill switch, wired into a car by a man who'd been trusted enough not to be searched. Seo-joon said nothing for a long moment after that. The men in the room knew better than to fill the silence. Bring him to me, he finally said. Quietly. While that conversation happened behind closed doors on one side of the city, on the other side of it, in Seongsu, 3 men in dark jackets walked the length of Dorita's street at a pace too slow and too deliberate to be anything but a message being delivered on purpose. They didn't knock. They didn't ask questions. One of them simply stood watch at the corner while the other 2 worked, quick and practiced, and by the time Dorita came out front to flip her sign to closed for the night, she found her shutter door hanging crooked on its hinge, spray paint dripping down the metal in a language she didn't need translated to understand the meaning of, and a single word scrawled across her window in red that made her blood run cold before she even finished reading it. She stood there in the rain that had started again without her noticing, staring at what had once been the one thing in this city she'd built entirely for herself, and understood, finally and completely, that there was no version of this story where she got to stay out of it. Seo-joon arrived within the hour, and he didn't bother pretending to be calm about it. He stood in front of the ruined shutter door with his jaw set tight enough that a muscle ticked along it, reading the word painted across her window like he was memorizing it for later, and when he finally turned to look at her, whatever composure he usually wore like a second skin had gone thin enough that she could see straight through it to the anger underneath. Pack what you need, he said. I'll have you on a flight to Lagos by morning. Excuse me? You have family there. Somewhere you can disappear for a few months while I deal with this properly. He said it like it was already decided, like her opinion on the matter was a formality he was extending out of courtesy rather than something he actually needed. I'll cover the cost. All of it. You won't have to think about money again until this is finished. Dorita looked at him for a long moment, rain dripping off the edge of the broken shutter between them, and felt something in her chest go hard and cold and very, very certain. No. Dorita. You don't get to decide that. She stepped past him and ran her fingers over the ruined paint on the glass, feeling the anger settle into something steadier, something she could actually use. 3 years. Do you understand what it took me to build this? I fixed this roof with my own hands. I rewired half this building myself because I couldn't afford an electrician. I sleep 4 hours a night some weeks so I can send money to a woman who raised me alone after men just like the ones who did this took everything my father built and left him with nothing but debt he didn't create. She turned to face him fully now. I am not getting on a plane because some coward with a spray can wants me scared. This is my life's work. I will defend it myself if I have to. For a moment he simply looked at her, and something shifted behind his eyes, not surprise exactly, more like a man recalculating what kind of person he was actually dealing with. You have no idea what Kang Min-hyuk is capable of, he said, quieter now. Then teach me, she said. Because I'm not leaving. He studied her for a long moment, rain running between them, and when he finally spoke again his voice had changed, less command, more something closer to respect, grudging and unfamiliar on him. If you're staying, he said, you're not staying alone. That was how Minho came into her life, Seo-joon's top lieutenant, broad-shouldered and unreadable, a man who moved like he'd spent more of his life anticipating violence than avoiding it. He set up in the back office of her garage with a folding cot and a police scanner and made it clear within the first hour that he intended to be a permanent fixture until this was resolved one way or another. Dorita didn't love the idea of a stranger sleeping 20 feet from her tool cabinet. She loved the idea of Kang Min-hyuk's men walking through her door unopposed even less, so she said nothing and let him stay. Seo-joon came back the next evening, and the one after that, ostensibly to check on the plan, though Dorita noticed he stayed longer each time than the plan strictly required. If Kang wants to hit us here, he said, standing in the middle of her workshop floor on the third night, looking up at the exposed rafters and heavy machinery like he was seeing it for the first time, we should think about how to make that expensive for him. You want to turn my garage into a war zone. I want to turn your garage into a reason he regrets coming here at all, he said, and something about the way he said it, flat and certain, made her realize he wasn't speaking hypothetically. He'd already started planning this the moment she refused to leave. She walked the floor with him that night, seeing her own shop through new eyes. She'd spent 3 years learning every inch of this building the way she'd once learned every inch of her father's. Where the concrete had cracked and settled, where the drainage ran, which support beams could hold real weight and which were mostly cosmetic. She'd never once thought of any of it as a weapon. Looking at it now, with Seo-joon beside her asking careful, specific questions about load capacities and sightlines, she started to. The pneumatic lifts run off compressed air, she said slowly, walking to the nearest one and resting a hand against its cold steel column. I can adjust the release valve to drop faster than it's rated for. Enough force to break a leg if someone's standing under it when it comes down. How many lifts do you have? 4. 2 rated for full-size trucks. He nodded slowly, and she watched him do something she hadn't expected, not command her, but listen, genuinely, like her expertise mattered more here than his instincts. What else? She thought about it, walking the length of the shop with new purpose. The solvent tanks in the back corner, industrial-grade degreaser strong enough to strip paint, could be rigged to a valve system that sprayed instead of poured, blinding anyone who caught a faceful of it. The overhead winch chain, usually used to haul engine blocks out of totaled cars, could swing wide across the main bay if the counterweight was released at the right angle. The crane control panel by the back wall, the one she used maybe twice a month for heavy transmission work, had more raw lifting capacity sitting dormant than either of them had first considered. You're thinking like someone who's done this before, Seo-joon said, watching her sketch it out on a scrap of cardboard with a grease pencil. I'm thinking like someone who's spent 3 years learning exactly what this building can do, she said. Turns out that's the same thing, when someone's trying to kill you in it. They worked late into the night rigging it all, And somewhere between running cable for a tripwire release and testing the swing radius of the overhead chain, the work stopped feeling like preparation for violence and started feeling like something closer to partnership. He held tools when she needed a third hand. She corrected his grip on a wrench without thinking twice about who he was to the rest of the city, and he let her, without a flicker of the authority he clearly wore everywhere else. It was during one of the quiet stretches, past midnight, both of them sitting on overturned crates with cups of instant coffee going cold between them, that he told her the rest of it, not the polished version people whispered about in markets, but the actual truth. "My mother cleaned floors at the docks," he said, staring at the cup in his hands rather than at her. "My father drank whatever money she brought home before we saw one of it. I was 12 the first time I stole food because there wasn't any at home, and 18 the first time I killed a man, because the alternative was watching him kill my mother instead." Dorita didn't say anything. She'd learned, from years of listening to men talk while she worked on their cars, that silence was often more useful than sympathy. "Beko wasn't always what it is now," he continued. "It used to be smaller. Meaner. I didn't build it to be powerful. I built it so nobody in my family would ever go hungry again, and then it just grew, because power is the only thing that keeps hunger from coming back once you've tasted it." He looked up at her finally. "I control the docks now. Half the shipping routes into the city move because I allow them to. And most nights I still can't sleep, because some part of me is still that boy waiting for his father to come home angry." "Is that why you didn't just have your men clear my shop out and hide me somewhere safe?" she said. "Because you know what it feels like to lose the one thing that's actually yours." Something in his face softened, just slightly, just enough for her to notice. Something like that. They didn't say anything else for a while after that. They didn't need to. The storm came back 3 nights later, the same kind of relentless downpour that had been falling the night they met, and Dorita would think, much later, that there was something almost deliberate about it, as if the city itself understood how this story was supposed to end and wanted the weather to match. Minho caught the first sign of it on the scanner an hour before midnight, unmarked vehicles moving in formation toward Seongsu, the same pattern the SUVs had used on the embankment road weeks earlier. He didn't waste time confirming it twice. He got Seo-joon on the phone, and within 20 minutes Seo-joon was back at the garage, soaked through, moving with the same coiled urgency Dorita remembered from that first terrible night. "He's not sending a warning this time," Seo-joon said, checking the chamber of the pistol at his hip with hands that didn't shake at all. "He's sending everyone." "Then we're ready for everyone," Dorita said, and meant it. They killed the main lights and left only the work lamps burning low, casting the shop in long amber shadows that made the space feel larger and more dangerous than it did in daylight. Dorita took her position near the crane control panel at the back, exactly where they'd planned, close enough to the overhead chain to reach the release lever the second she needed it. Seo-joon and Minho took the flanks, weapons drawn, waiting in the dark the way men who'd done this kind of waiting before knew how to wait. The first sign of them was headlights sweeping across the shutter door, too many at once, engines cutting off in near unison outside. Then the door came down. Not opened, kicked in, hinges tearing loose from a metal frame Dorita had installed with her own hands, and Kang Min-hyuk's men poured into the shop with the kind of confidence that came from expecting an easy kill. They found neither. The first 2 through the door didn't see the tripwire strung ankle height across the entrance, and the pneumatic lift beside them dropped its full weight in half the time it was rated for, catching one man across the shoulder hard enough to fold him sideways with a scream that cut short as he hit the concrete. The second stumbled back into the solvent line Dorita had rigged along the near wall, and the valve released on cue, a hissing arc of industrial degreaser catching him full in the face. He went down clawing at his eyes, weapon clattering uselessly from his hand. Gunfire answered almost immediately, muzzle flashes strobing through the dark shop, and Dorita threw herself behind the engine block she'd been using as cover, heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Seo-joon returned fire from the shadows near the parts shelving, controlled and precise, dropping a third man before he'd made it 3 steps past the door. Minho covered the opposite flank, forcing two more attackers back behind an overturned workbench. More kept coming. Kong hadn't sent a message this time. He'd sent a small army, and for every man that went down under the shop's rigged defenses, two more pushed forward through the smoke and rain pouring in from the broken door. Dorita's hands found the winch controls without her fully deciding to move them there, some instinct built from 3 years of operating this exact machinery taking over where fear would otherwise have frozen her. She caught the overhead chain's counterweight release just as 3 of Kang's men advanced together through the main bay, and the heavy steel arms swung wide across the shop floor at chest height, scattering them like bowling pins, one man catching the full swing hard enough to go down and not get back up. Left side, Seo-joon shouted, and she ducked instinctively as he fired past her shoulder, dropping a man who'd circled around toward the crane controls with a clear line on her back. The fight tore through the shop in ugly, close-quarters bursts, gunfire and screaming and the wet slap of rain still pouring through the broken entrance, and slowly, methodically, the numbers began shifting. The garage Dorita had spent 3 years building wasn't just surviving the assault. It was eating Kang's men alive, one rigged trap at a time, exactly the way she and Seo-joon had planned it. It should have been enough. It almost was. Then the main shop floor's back door slammed open, and Kang Min-hyuk himself stepped through it, flanked by 2 men who moved with the particular calm of people who'd been saving themselves for exactly this moment. He was younger than Dorita had pictured, sharp-suited despite the rain, with the kind of composed cruelty in his expression that told her immediately why so many people in this city said his name only in whispers. Seo-joon, Kang said, almost pleasantly, raising his weapon. You've made this so much more complicated than it needed to be. Seo-joon turned to face him fully, weapon already raised, and for a moment the 2 men simply stared each other down across the wreckage of Dorita's shop floor, years of rivalry compressed into a single held breath. The shot came fast, and Dorita didn't see exactly who fired first, only that Seo-joon staggered a half-second later, a dark stain already spreading across his shoulder, his own return fire going wide as he caught himself against a workbench. Seo-joon. Stay down, he shouted at her, forcing himself upright, weapon still raised despite the blood soaking through his sleeve. Kang advanced, unhurried, the kind of confidence that came from a man who believed the fight was already decided. His 2 remaining men flanked him, weapons trained on Seo-joon, who was bleeding freely now, breathing hard, still somehow standing between Kang and the woman crouched behind the engine block 20 feet away. Dorita's mind raced, adrenaline burning through the fear, cataloging everything she had left to work with, and her eyes landed on the crane's main control panel, and above it, suspended from the heavy chain hoist she'd used 100 times to pull dead engines out of wrecked cars, a fully assembled V8 block hanging exactly where she'd left it that afternoon, directly above the path Kang would need to cross to reach the back exit where his getaway truck waited. She didn't think. She moved. Her hands hit the release lever the same instant Kang stepped beneath the suspended engine, and the chain gave way all at once, sending 400 pounds of solid steel crashing down directly onto the hood of the truck idling behind him, crumpling the frame and shattering the windshield in an explosion of glass and twisted metal loud enough to stop every man in the shop mid-motion. Kang spun, weapon swinging toward her, fury replacing composure for the first time all night, but the half-second of chaos was exactly the opening Seo-joon needed. He closed the distance between them with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for a man losing blood as fast as he was, driving Kang backward into the wreckage of his own getaway vehicle and disarming him with a brutal economy of motion that told Dorita everything she needed to know about the boy who'd killed a man at 18 to save his mother's life. The fight ended fast after that. Kang's remaining men, seeing their boss pinned and disarmed against the ruined truck, made the calculation men like that always eventually make, and threw down their weapons rather than die for a cause that had clearly already lost. Seo-joon stood over Kang Min-hyuk in the wreckage of Dorita's shop, blood soaking through his shirt, breathing hard, and looked down at the man who'd spent weeks trying to kill them both. You should have taken the loss on the road, Seo-joon said quietly. You would have kept your life. What happened to Kang Min-hyuk after that, Dorita never learned the details of, and some part of her understood she was better off not asking. What she did learn, over the following days, was that Seo-joon's syndicate moved with quiet, comprehensive efficiency once the fight was over. The Chilsung cartel's remaining lieutenants scattered or surrendered within a week, its smuggling routes absorbed or shut down entirely, its territory folded quietly back into the peace Seongsu hadn't known in longer than anyone could remember. The corporate developer who'd spent months trying to buy Dorita out of her lease simply stopped calling, its office closing without explanation, and she understood without needing it confirmed that the two things had never been separate at all. Seo-joon healed slowly, stubbornly refusing to rest as much as his doctor demanded, showing up at her garage most evenings anyway with his arm in a sling and an excuse about needing to check on the repairs. Dorita let him stay each time, and eventually stopped pretending the excuses were necessary. Weeks later, once the shop had been repaired and the shutter door replaced with steel twice as heavy as the original, a courier arrived at her garage with an envelope she almost refused to open, certain it was another buyout offer in disguise. It wasn't. It was a deed, to her shop, to the buildings on either side of it, to the entire commercial block of Seongsu she'd spent 3 years fighting to hold on to a single corner of. Her name on every line where it mattered. She found Seo-joon outside a week after that, leaning against a car she didn't recognize at first, a beautifully restored classic sedan in deep matte black, gleaming despite the gray Seoul afternoon. He looked healthier than she'd seen him in weeks, sling gone, dressed down in a way she'd never once seen him allow himself before. "You didn't have to buy me a city block," she said, though there was no real argument left in her voice. "I didn't buy it for you," he said. "I bought it so no one could ever take it from you again. There's a difference." She studied him for a long moment, the rain from that first terrible night feeling like a lifetime ago now, and found herself smiling despite everything. "So what brings you by?" she said, wiping her hands on a rag though they weren't especially dirty. "Another emergency? Another mob boss who needs rescuing?" "Just a tune-up," he said, patting the hood of the restored sedan with something almost like affection. "I hear the best mechanic in Seoul works out of this shop." "She's very expensive," Dorita said. "I can afford it," he said, and for the first time since the night she'd knelt down in the rain in front of his broken car, his smile reached all the way to his eyes.